Race Matters is made possible by support from the Office of Educational Equity at Penn State University.
No matter where you live, no matter where you work, no matter who you are, race matters.
Welcome to Race Matters. I'm Cindy Deutschman-Ruiz. As part of its manifesto, the Queers of Color Coalition at Stanford University declares that racism and homophobia are merely different sides of the same struggle. We refuse to choose our cause, accept our label, compromise our values, rank our priorities, or quantify our multiple identities. We demand a space that crosses boundaries, that defies categorization, destroys stereotypes, and celebrates diversity. In her book Movement in Black, poet Pat Parker wrote, "If I could take all my parts with me when I go somewhere and not have to say to one of them, 'No, you stay home tonight, you won't be welcome,' because I'm going to an all-white party where I can be gay but not black. Or I'm going to a black poetry reading and half the poets are anti-homosexual. Or thousands of situations where something of what I am cannot come with me. The day all the different parts of me can come along, we would have what I would call a revolution." Tonight we're talking about sexuality and race, specifically those places where typically outlaw sexualities intersect with race, culture, and community. It's a big topic, so let's get to it. Let me welcome my guests in the studio. Vivian Smith is a graduate student in media studies at Penn State. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Suzanne Aga is a graduate student in sociology, also at Penn State.
Hi.
Hi. And by phone, Christina Accomando. She's an associate professor of English at California State University, Humboldt, where she teaches American literature, ethnic studies, and women's studies. She helped establish the university's new interdisciplinary minor in multicultural queer studies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
As always, you can join us via the web from the shows section of racematters.psu.edu. You can email your questions to racematters@psu.edu. And you can also call in at 800-543-8242. So let's start with some introductions. Vivian, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay. Well, I am a media studies student at Penn State. I'm getting my master's there, and this is my second year in it. I come from Louisiana. It's Kenner, Louisiana. It's outside of New Orleans, about 15 minutes. And I've pretty much lived there all of my life, been up north a little bit in Ohio, but grew up in the Baptist church, grew up in the Methodist church, and went to a United Methodist University, Dillard University, graduated from there with my bachelor's in communications. So I've kind of dealt with a couple of things. There's always been that split with religion and sexuality for me. But
Was that something you started struggling with as a child?
Actually, even though I had thoughts about it, I never really considered it an option. It just didn't seem possible for two women to love each other or to get together and have that kind of intimacy that it seemed like heterosexuals had. I just never thought of it that way. I just kind of had to picture myself as something else if I wanted to love women. But then it wasn't until I went to undergrad and I met someone who was a lesbian, and my brother also, he came out to my family, that it kind of seemed possible that, you don't have to fit into this one mold. You could just love whoever you want.
Susie, what about you?
I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. My father is Arab American. My mom is Hungarian, so I'm half Arab, and I'm a lesbian. I came out at the very end of my senior year in college and moved up here to State College, Pennsylvania after that. That was a bit of a culture shock and a transition. So that's sort of my background.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, again, your childhood and how that process was as far as coming out.
Yeah. Sexuality for me wasn't something that I felt like I could even talk about or think about or reach for even. It just wasn't an issue that was comfortable in my life or in my household, in my family. That's why I think it wasn't until I was 21, almost 22, about to leave home, that I started to sort of even struggle with consciously those issues. So looking back after I sort of began that coming out process, I could see some sort of signs from earlier childhood crushes I had had on girls and women, and things that sort of indicated to me that maybe I was starting to want to explore those feelings, but it was something I wasn't really able to do until a little bit later.
You had told me in an earlier conversation about how there's no word for homosexuality in Arabic.
That's true. My father was raised Muslim, although he didn't practice the religion at all in my lifetime, and so it wasn't religiously a part of my life. But the culture was definitely there, and I can remember being an adolescent and out to dinner with my family and another family, and there was some issue in the news about homosexuality, and so it was brought up. And one of the few references I can remember being made to homosexuality during my childhood was that my dad said there isn't a word, he wasn't aware of a word in Arabic for gay, but he did know the word for child molester.
So he equated those, essentially,
Yes.
is what you're saying.
Yeah. So that was one of the few messages I got early on about what homosexuality was and how it was regarded.
Right. Christina, can you talk a little bit about how queer, the multicultural queer studies minor got put together? It's a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, it's very recent on our campus. This is our first year offering this new minor, and it is, in fact, the only minor in the nation with that specific title that brings together multicultural and queer. So it's very new on our campus, and in fact, it's a somewhat new idea in academia. On the campus of HSU, the proposal for the minor really evolved over a period of years. Over many years, over the last 10 years, we've had specific courses offered in lesbian and gay studies kinds of issues, and we've had lots of supportive faculty and interested students. But it's only in the last year that a group of students began advocating publicly, really advocating and agitating for the creation of a minor that would focus on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues and people. Even though there have been courses over the last 10 years, they wanted a program that would bring the courses together in closer dialogue with each other. And also they wanted a way to have their work in that area acknowledged in some way in their transcripts, to show that this is not just an interest or a politics, but also an area of academic study. Students began...
Legitimizes it in a certain way, right?
Yeah, and it tells us that it's more than just what some people are talking about, that it's a legitimate field of study, that it's something that they might be going into in some way professionally or as activists or as academics. So the student end of it included gathering a petition and writing letters to the campus newspaper. There were some editorials in support and also some critical editorials. But all of this activity inspired a group of faculty and students to form a committee under the leadership of the Women's Studies program, but it was a very, very interdisciplinary committee with folks from psychology, women's studies, education, government and politics, ethnic studies, English, and sociology. And we began to talk about what a minor in lesbian and gay studies or queer studies could look like. And in fact, that piece of it, like what are we going to call the minor, was a very big part of those discussions as well.
Right. And I wanted to get into that because multicultural queer studies, I mean, first of all, we have to talk about the word queer.
Right.
Because that is obviously a very definite choice. And in an earlier conversation, you mentioned it took about 8 months to come to a decision on that. So I know you wrote a little something for the sort of the coming out bash for the minor. And I was wondering if you could read that so we could understand a little bit about how that process came together.
Sure. This is a statement I read at the coming out party we had for the minor last semester. Why the word queer? For many, this term is an epithet, an insult, a threat. For many, however, the word has been reclaimed, much like the pink triangle, which came from the Holocaust, but now is deployed and displayed as a symbol of lesbian and gay pride and activism. The insult behind the word queer is to say that someone is not normal. In reclaiming queer, activists and academics declare that there is value in challenging the norm. For many, the word is more inclusive, more plural, encompassing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and other categories and refusals of categories. For many, the word queer is more politicized, more radical than the other options. And finally, queer studies can mean not just the study of queer people, but also the queering of conventional approaches to academic disciplines. Why multicultural and queer? Many writers and activists have talked about the danger of lesbian and gay studies and queer studies, meaning simply the study of white lesbian and gay people. Naming multicultural insists that we study issues of sexuality and gender as part of a complex matrix that also includes race, ethnicity, class, and culture. The rich resources and diverse voices found in the study of multicultural queer studies reveal how powerful it is to focus our work on these complex intersections. Many of these brilliant and stunning voices have been omitted in more traditional versions of lesbian and gay studies, as well as more traditional ethnic studies paradigms. So that's the short version of the long discussion that became multicultural queer studies on our campus.
Right. There's a lot in there. And I mean, we could probably spend an entire hour talking about the use of the word queer and
Right.
what's, pros and cons and all the rest. But I think we're going to leave it at that and let people draw their own conclusions about that. But I wanted to go into something that a theme that came up in terms of why multicultural. And it has to do with this sense of marginalization and omission. And specifically, Vivian and Susie, I wanted you to address this from sort of a personal experience level, as far as this sense of being, pushed off from pushed to the side of a discussion, of a community, of an experience, and experiences that you may have had like that. You want to start, Vivian?
Yeah. At first, I was thinking, I haven't had many experiences like that. But then I remembered we had a discussion in the Black Grad Student Association one day. And I can't remember. Oh, they were talking about the down low, which is pretty much Black men who have girlfriends and wives, but they still engage in homosexual acts, and that's a major issue for people because they feel like, well, these men should say, who they are, and if they're having sex with men, then they should say it and call themselves such. But these men do not identify as gay or bisexual; they identify as straight, but they have sex with other men while they're in relationships with other women. And during this conversation, I was the Black lesbian feminist, and basically in all of the possible negative connotations that could have, I guess I was the one that represented all that. It would seem like it because I was questioning a lot of things that they're talking about, and in particular just about there was this whole notion of Christianity that came back in that homosexuality is wrong, and in a sense that I don't know, just a lot of different things. And at that time, it just seemed like people really wanted to make my voice seem like it was this one voice that was off to the side, this wild person. She's just a man hater. She's a lesbian. That's why she talks like this.
You were the representative for almost a whole paradigm. It sounds like, and one that you don't necessarily identify with. Sounds like it was a name that was given to you, or a status that was given to you by other people.
No, I am all of those, and I say it. It's just that their idea of what it is, especially being a feminist, and standing up for men who want to have sex with men, standing up for homosexuals, gay folks, just I guess being the one to question a lot of arguments that they had. I was deemed as, I guess, just that one lone ranger, kind of just throwing out randomness that they didn't believe in.
Sure.
And so I kind of seemed like the crazy one, even though I thought a lot of stuff that I said made sense. They just weren't looking at some assumptions that they just based their opinions on.
Okay. Susie?
I guess the essence of my experience has been at least a sort of idea of invisibility. If there isn't a word for homosexuality in Arabic, how can you even begin to talk about it? My extended family does not live in this country. They're all over in Iraq. So I haven't had to deal with the issue of coming out to them or being out to them or anything like that. I've certainly thought about how they would react, and I don't really know because I've only met them once, and they've been very loving and very caring, and I would like to believe that that's how they would treat me no matter what. But seeing how my father has reacted, or in essence basically denied completely my homosexuality, my love for women, my lesbianism, I can't imagine that there's a strong possibility that wouldn't be that positive. In coming out to family friends that are from the Middle East, whether it's Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, has been something that I actually really haven't even done yet because I've been so concerned about it. And so it's really more been sort of invisibility, even then I can't even say exclusion. It's like it just doesn't exist. It's not something that's part of that culture.
It's the thing that comes before exclusion,
Right.
before you've even started
Yes.
the conversation.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing. I have not yet had that conversation with my dad. That's something I'm working towards being able to do. I've written some letters and haven't gotten many responses. So that the conversation is going to be the next step for me.
Right. Christina, this concept of multicultural, I know that, we talked earlier today about sort of a process you went through as an academic of studying various things and noticing quite literally sort of this marginalization and people of color sort of relegated to footnotes and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how you, as an academic, came to the point of feeling such a strong need to marry this concept of multiculturalism with queer studies?
Sure, and I have to say, in talking about my genesis as an academic, I have to see that always linked as my experiences as an activist. And I've been a feminist activist since about the age of 14, and that's informed kind of everything that I've done. As an activist and an academic, during graduate school, trying to find a dissertation project, I found myself interested in looking at the roots of the feminist movement. And as I looked at the 19th century documents and stories of feminism, I kept seeing Black women's voices, literally in the margins, as you mentioned, in the footnotes or in a quote at the beginning of a text, but never really as the central consciousness of what I was looking at. And I realized I couldn't just write another narrative about white feminism with a chapter on Black women's voices, and I really ended up recentering the whole project and focusing on issues of race and gender in U.S. slavery, in particular law and literature of slavery and resistance through some really powerful Black women writers of the 19th century, including Harriet Jacobs and orator Sojourner Truth. And that was sort of a first really powerful transformation in how I was looking at myself as an academic and as an activist. As I began to teach more and more complex issues, including a course that I still teach at Humboldt State University called Power, Privilege, Race, Class, Gender, Sexuality, we began working more and more on looking at intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality, that you can't look at any of these things as if they stand alone. Whether you're in women's studies or ethnic studies or in literature, which is my actual field of study.
In your case, all three.
Yes, exactly. You can't peel any of these things off. You can't say, okay, next semester I'll do a queer class, and then the following spring I'll do a class on women, and then I'll do a class on African American and Asian American folks. These things are always simultaneous, and I love that excerpt you read from Pat Parker about needing to take all the parts of herself with her, and when that is possible, that is revolution.
Right.
So more and more, it became really clear to me that to work on these pieces, whether I want to be a better instructor of ethnic studies or a better instructor of women's studies, that I had to take really seriously this theory or notion of intersexuality and simultaneity, and that means working on those issues in a very serious way, and that included trying to make institutional change, like creating this minor in multicultural queer studies. And it's really interesting the difference that it makes to, for instance, have both of those words, multicultural and queer, in the minor. I mean, it not only led to the genesis of some brand new classes, but those of us who were already teaching classes that ended up being part of the minor really had to go back and re-envision those courses. So courses that had already been queer studies courses like sexual diversity, queer women's lives, choice and changes in sexuality, really great courses that deal with sexuality in very complex ways. Those professors had to go back and realize, most of the semester we're talking about white folks. There are these moments of talking about multiculturalism, but it didn't really infuse the whole class. And as it turns out, you do have to completely rethink a syllabus or an anthology or a dissertation or whatever you might be working on. You actually have to reimagine your syllabus, your curriculum, your field of study when you put these words together next to each other. And I think that's a really powerful, transformative process.
It certainly sets the bar at a different place, I think, than it's really ever been. And when you talk about this compartmentalization of, you take the women's studies stuff over here and you put the queer studies stuff over there and you put the multicultural stuff in a third place, it makes me think of the way sort of in our culture we have these months, which when they began, I think, was a really good idea. I'm not so sure they're such a great idea anymore, because all you do is you talk about blacks during February, you talk about women during March, you talk about gay people during June, and the rest of the year you're off the hook.
Right.
So, I mean, it seems to me that there's an interesting way in which what you're doing in academia is something that in a certain respect, also needs to be done out in the world. And maybe there's also another nexus, not just with sexuality and race and gender and stuff, but also with sort of the outside world, the world outside of academia. And while you were talking, Vivian was just doing all this nodding. So I thought I'd let her say whatever came to mind.
I think the whole minor is just a great thing, because you see it everywhere, and I see it a lot in the classes where there's a particular focus, and the focus, even though it's it's not said, it's focused on white people, and then towards the end of the class or the end of the semester, they have it's a section that's for whatever marginalized group, be it blacks, gay and lesbian people, or so on and so forth. And I think that's the thing. It's moving past inclusion to that whole infusion where it's just weaved throughout class, and it starts from day one, instead of saying, okay, well, this is our focus, but towards the end of the semester we'll get to issues of class, issues of race, issues of this, when they're there from the beginning,
sort of as an addendum.
Right.
This is the real class, and then we're going to tack on this other stuff at the end in order to fulfill a certain requirement or a certain ethic or something like that.
I'm sorry, real quick. And they're usually cut out because somehow, if there's snow days or things like that, then
that's the first thing that goes.
That's the first thing that goes, because we I still haven't covered these chapters, so all these other chapters that I added on, we're gonna just have to do those next semester.
Yeah, 800-543-8242 if you want to join the conversation, or racematters@psu.edu. Did you want to add something to that, Susie? Or
well, it just seems like it's a complex way to look at the world, but it's much more realistic. Right? People aren't just white or gay or Hispanic or Jewish or whatever else. I think it captures the reality of our existence a lot more accurately.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at some of your syllabi, Christina, and you mentioned that very long named course, Power, Privilege, Ethnicity, Race. I don't remember the whole title.
It kind of takes the whole semester just to say the title.
It does, yeah. But I noticed some stuff that you wrote right into the syllabus, and it said that, I'm sorry, this is for the syllabus for multicultural queer narratives. It said, often we will be pushed outside of our comfort zones for learning and unlearning to take place. And I find that really interesting, because we talk a lot, especially in academia, there are a lot of discussions about how to have conversations in which people feel safe.
Right.
And what you're talking about, you do mention the safety issue, but we're talking about feeling safe in a context of being willing to open yourself up a little bit, to step out to somewhere where it might be a little bit scary. You're not going to fall off a cliff, but you might be a little scared. And I wondered, as an instructor, as a teacher, how you navigate that in the classroom, what some of the challenges are, if there are some particular examples you can think of where that has really come to fruition or hit a wall or whatever.
And I will reiterate that I always tell my students, and I make a point of having it in the syllabus, as in the syllabus that you saw, that we're going to work our best to create a safe environment in the classroom, but not always a comfortable one. And I think it's really important to make that distinction. Obviously, you shouldn't walk out of the classroom worried that somebody's going to, assault you. So safety is key, that we can express our views and not be personally attacked. But discomfort comes with the territory, and often a student will say, this book made me uncomfortable, that comment made me uncomfortable, as if that's a bad thing, as if that means stop teaching that book. Don't teach Audre Lorde. I am uncomfortable. And in
as
fact,
if being uncomfortable weren't sometimes the place where you actually do your most learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is where we are opening our eyes to something we had not thought about before. And that's painful. That's difficult. And Audre Lorde, among others, talk about how change requires growth, and growth is painful, and that's part of it. That's part of how it works. So one piece of it is announcing up front, this class will make you uncomfortable, and coming up with a list of ground rules at the beginning of the semester, including things like no personal attacks, and also sitting with discomfort, so that people sort of know what they're getting into, which doesn't make it any easier when it happens, but it's important to foreground that it's going to happen. And the fact that we deal with so many issues and intersections, such as in that class, race, class, gender, sexuality, on the one hand, that makes things really difficult, because no matter who you are, you can be a fifth-year women's studies major who can deconstruct gender 24 hours a day. You can be a
with one hand
activist.
tied behind your back.
What?
With one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah. Or you can be a Mecha activist who's really comfortable talking about race and class issues. You can be the leader of your local queer student union chapter. All sorts of students who come in really confident on one set of issues. All of us are going to be pushed out of our comfort zone, including the professor, including the student activist, because we're touching on so many things. No one gets to stay comfortable the whole time. No one gets to be the authority the whole time.
Right.
And while that's really hard, it's also really good. It's not that, okay, we have the women in the class who are going to be good at this women's studies class and the uncomfortable men, or we have the people of color over here and the white people over here. Those lines are shifting anyway, even within a single person. They're not simple static lines. But in a class that deals with seriously and honestly with open eyes with race, class, gender, and sexuality, we're always kind of being destabilized. And I think that's a good thing, although it's a hard thing. It's
Right.
a very difficult thing as well.
Right. Well, first I want to mention, you mentioned Audre Lorde, and I think before we go on, we should say something about who she was. I mean, she certainly was one of those people who kind of pushed herself into every conversation and broke down barriers in every direction. I think she used to refer to herself something like black lesbian feminist warrior poet, I think was something
Right.
along those lines. Yeah.
And she would often open an essay or a speech with a very, very pointed naming of all the parts of herself. Certainly that she's black, female, feminist, lesbian, activist. Often she would say, post-mastectomy woman, whatever
After
was
she had her
salient in
cancer,
her
right.
life. Yeah.
Yeah. She struggled with that for many years and wrote extensively about cancer, which ultimately took her life about, 8 years ago? Something along those lines?
1992.
Oh, 92. It was more than that. Okay. All right. 800-543-8242. Let's go to Robert in State College. Hi, Robert.
Hi there.
Hi.
Very interesting. I would point out that when you speak of queer people, you're talking about one end of the distribution. If you consider the entire population, the distribution on the other end is completely asexual people are also queer. And that's never been included. They always include the queer people on the one end of the distribution. I might add also that asexuality or homosexuality, I should say, occurs. I've watched this in brown trout. Any farmer worth his salt at all has witnessed it in all of his cattle, and he gets rid of the cattle. He gets rid of the sheep. He gets rid of the pigs that are homosexual. This is part of nature, and it's inevitable that is the distribution, and there's nothing that can be done about it. You cannot change it. If you truncate a normal distribution, you create chaos.
Are you a statistician?
Well, yes and no.
I'm wondering about, you're talking about asexuality, and that's interesting because it's literally, I don't think, ever come up in a conversation. I'm wondering how big a phenomenon you think asexuality is.
It has to be part of the other part of the distribution.
Mm-hmm.
People are born with have absolutely no interest in sex whatsoever. Then the conventional wisdom is the normal situation where male and female come together as husband and wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other end of the distribution, which is, I don't like the word queer because it's just the other end of the distribution.
Right. So you're talking about something that's sort of like a curve.
That's right.
Like a wave. What is that, a sine wave?
Normal curve. Normal curve.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it is. It occurs in nature. It's part of nature, and there's nothing that you can't do that.
Well, thanks, Robert. I appreciate that insight because we are going to talk about religion. And of course, in many world religions, homosexuality is very much condemned. And there is this notion about it being unnatural. And what you're talking about is the evidence that you've seen of it being entirely natural, entirely a part of the animal world, whether it's human animal or other animals. So I think that's a really good insight.
And I just want to mention that part of the power of the word queer although for some people it's also what they find annoying about the word, is that it's a word that's very much in flux. I have just one quote from David Halpern, an article we use in class. Queer is, by definition, whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. So we might define queer as lesbian and gay, or LGBT, or LGBTI. But if someone like your caller Robert wanted to talk about asexuality as something that he considers queer, that he would want to talk about in a meeting or in a classroom, he could make a case for why asexuality is queer, particularly in a culture where everything is so hypersexualized.
Right.
So I think the flexibility of that term can be a really powerful thing that can speak to something we haven't even thought of yet, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned this idea of what is outside the norm being queer, because it raises the possibility that some day down the road queer will cease being queer and just be normal, and then how do we define it? I mean, that's going to be continually in flux. And I think there's a sense at which certainly people who are very afraid of homosexuality, and certainly in the current discussion about same-sex marriage, seem to feel very much as though being queer, quote unquote, is becoming the norm, and that they're under attack in that regard, that it is becoming the norm. And Vivian's shaking her head.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that's foolishness. Anybody that thinks that queer becoming normal is an attack on them, I'm like, it has nothing to do with you. Actually, maybe we want you to expand your mind and open your mind to realize that I'm just as human as you are, regardless of whether I am with a man or with a woman, or decided I'm not into sex or any kind of sexuality at all.
Right.
It's just funny how people can take certain issues and make it so, I guess, an issue about them, when it's about them opening their minds, yes, but it's not like an attack on them.
Right.
Or, things like that.
What is the relationship between my relationship over here, let's say, and your relationship over there? I mean, just to, if I want to have a same-sex marriage, why is the legitimizing of that in any way affecting your marriage?
Right.
Since I brought it up, Susie, did you want to say anything about this current debate and any of your thoughts on it?
There's so much to say. Where to begin? I guess for me, what it comes down to is that we're really talking about civil rights and the 1,000 plus rights that people who want to marry individuals of the same sex don't have access to. And it's, I guess on the one hand, to me, it seems like it's a really simple issue and it's a moot point, but obviously it's not, because there's so much controversy around it, and somehow legitimizing same-sex relationships is incredibly threatening to a lot of people. I'm glad that it's happening. I'm glad that this discussion is happening, that it's in the media, that it's getting talked about. I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to move in a positive direction, despite some of the current leadership, but
well, it's just interesting to me how ever since Mayor Newsom in San Francisco started having these same-sex weddings performed, you've seen this ripple effect going in both directions. You have different principalities and so on. Like, what was it in Seattle, where they legally can't allow same-sex marriages, but they've decided to go ahead and recognize them from elsewhere, which is sort of the opposite of what a lot of states have done. So you've had and the mayor of New Paltz, New York, who started marrying people and then was forced to stop. So, it's going in both directions. You've got the president talking about an amendment and all the rest. Christina, you're dealing mostly, I would imagine, with young students in undergraduate in this minor, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm wondering if this whole marriage debate is even makes any sense to them. Is that even an issue to people of the 18 to 21-ish kind of age range?
Well, it's interesting. Polls have shown that there is an interesting kind of age curve with issues like voting on popular initiatives on banning same-sex marriage, that very often strong votes in favor of a ban come from older voters, and younger voters are completely mystified that anyone would want to ban such a thing. For the most part, students are kind of blown away by the fact that was mentioned earlier that there are more than 1,000 rights that attach to marriage. Most of my students are not themselves married. on the one hand, they think, well, marriage is just this personal, private thing. How is this even, why do we even legislate this in the first place? I can love whoever I want, that kind of attitude.
Right.
And it blows them away that there are very, very concrete political, legal, economic realities, like whether or not you can get into the hospital to see your partner or your child if you're not listed as a legal family member.
And there are just so many stories. I mean, certainly, especially during the HIV epidemic, there have been so many stories of people who didn't have any sort of legal protection to be able to get in and make any sort of meaningful decisions for someone that they had been with for 10 years, 20 years.
Right.
There's all sorts of stories out there like that.
There's a really powerful essay that we read in the Power Privilege class about Sharon Kowalski, and this was a famous case several years ago about a woman who was in a coma after a terrible car accident, and her partner of many, many years was being shut out. She was the person who could best care for her partner. She was the person her partner most responded to, and the father was organizing a court case to eliminate her from the process altogether. And it's a really interesting article that focuses on intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality in different ways that sexism played a role, different ways that homophobia played a role, because there were all sorts of factors coming into play. And again, it makes you see how we have to look at these things all together in an intersection and not just peel them out from each other. I also wanted to mention in one of my literature classes I teach Tim Miller's play Glory Box, which is about a really specific legal issue around same-sex marriage, which is same-sex binational couples. His male partner is Australian, Tim Miller is American, and for them to stay together, they need to basically leave the country because his partner cannot stay in the country unless he does something like marry someone, and he cannot legally marry his partner.
Sure.
Which and students, when we taught that class, when we taught that book, and Tim Miller also came and performed his piece at Humboldt State University. Students, again, were blown away that such a thing exists. They couldn't believe that one of the main ways someone can get immigration rights is through marriage, and same-sex couples have no access to that whatsoever.
Yeah, I actually did a story about that a number of years ago, and it's a really fascinating thing, and I imagine even has become much more difficult in the wake of 9/11, especially depending upon where one's partner may be from. I can imagine it's gotten even more challenging. I'd like to show a clip from an episode of Now with Bill Moyers. This is a conversation with an author by the name of Irshad Manji. She's Muslim. She's from Uganda originally, but she was raised in Canada. And she recently wrote a book called The Problem with Islam.
I need to get something straight. You hosted the program in Canada called Queer Television. You're an outspoken lesbian. How is it that you integrate that side of yourself with your reading of the Quran?
Well, first of all, I am openly gay, but I'm certainly not arrogantly gay. And by that I mean I don't necessarily believe that being in a same-sex relationship is acceptable to my God. It may very well be a sin. I grant that possibility, truly. But only my God can make that decision on the day of judgment. And in the meantime, David, just as people have questions for me, how do you reconcile homosexuality and Islam? I have questions for them. For example, the Quran is very clear that everything that God made is, quote, excellent, that nothing that God made is, quote, in vain, and that God deliberately designed the world's breathtaking multiplicity. So how do my detractors reconcile those statements with their utter condemnation of homosexuality? I'm not saying that I'm wrong, but I want to know what makes them believe they are right.
I wanted to use that as a way to get in and talk a little bit about religion, because as much as we're talking about race, where it comes together with sexuality, we can't really get away from religion, because religion is often the basis that is used to condone homophobia, to say that this is a sin, it said so in the Bible, or it says so here or there. And I want to be clear, I started off with this clip. It's not to say that Islam is in any way unique in this condemnation of homosexuality. I mean, certainly that would be quite misinformation. So I did want to say that. But let's talk a little bit about religious background and how that kind of relates. And I think, Vivian, it might be a good place to start with you as far as your own background in the Black church.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I grew up in the Baptist church, and now and actually had some dealings with the Methodist church. And I haven't found any problems so far with the Methodist churches that I've attended, but in the Baptist church, I was a musician there, and I'd sit on the drums and I'd play, and I would sit there and I'd listen to our preacher, and of course sometimes he would get into his tirade about homosexuality, how it's a sin and it's an abomination to God, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, I'm your musician. Your other musician is gay as well. You have probably gay members in the choir, and you really want us to be participants in the church and be members of the church. And then you talk to me after church and, you love me like one of your daughters. And I just wonder, how would he feel if, I told him, Pastor, I'm a lesbian. Did you know that? I'm sure you probably heard rumors.
Right.
How would he feel then? And then sometimes how do I feel when I'm sitting there? Because it's like, I love the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
But then there's that other part where, the guy that I look up to, or who's supposed to be a messenger from God, is telling me that I'm wrong for who I love,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm going to hell. And, in church, nobody wants to go to hell.
Oh, well, in or out of church, right?
Right, in or out of church, nobody wants to go to hell. But I mean, it's just kind of hard.
I wonder, because you're talking about, there's this other musician and members of the choir and members of the congregation, and I have to assume when you're saying that none of these people is actually open within the church. So I guess my question is then, is it a requirement to continue to really be participatory within this particular church tradition, to be silent about your sexuality? Do you have to take that part, and as Pat Parker sort of talked about it, and put it over there when you come to church?
You have to be silent, or you have to be in reform.
Reform meaning trying to give it up?
Basically, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I guess believing that you can change. And it's a touchy topic, I guess, by, whether it's inborn or if people become gay and can then, I guess deprogram, unprogram themselves,
right,
and no longer be gay but now be straight. And there have been people who have kind of talked about it and said, well, now I am, I used to do that. I used to have sex with guys. I used to do all that. I used to run the streets. And now the Lord has saved me, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And I'm not saying that their testimony is, is invalid or anything like that. But I don't,
that's not your reality. That's
right,
not the truth for you
right,
in your own life.
Right.
Yeah, right. Did you want to add anything, Susan?
I guess, for me, growing up, religion wasn't a big part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that sort of 2 points I wanted to make is, first, that there is a great deal of variation among churches, congregations. I mean, I've been to Catholic churches that have done civil unions for same-sex couples.
Sure.
And I have personally found the Unitarian Universalist church that I've just recently started attending that's not only accepting but actually affirming of homosexuality,
Mm-hmm.
which is an absolutely wonderful environment to be in. And I know there's other churches that have that same
Right.
perspective. So it is possible to find a religious home in which you can be comfortable.
Oh, sure. I think the point I was trying to make is that normally within whatever culture you're talking about,
Yes.
the justifications for condemning homosexuality generally come from some sort of a religious tract.
Yes, absolutely.
Or religious tradition, so which doesn't in any way mean that there aren't many
Right.
religions that are there,
Right.
or many individual churches or congregations. I also, in the course of the research for this program, ran across different organizations related to the notion of two-spirit people within some Native American traditions, and the notion there being that there's male and female spirit within a person, and that was essentially sort of the way to describe gays and lesbians within various tribes. And the notion there, which I found very interesting, was that everything was fine until the colonists, the colonialists, came in and sort of imposed their own notions of appropriate sexuality and gender and everything else. And so, there you might have a tradition that, at least in theory, originally was very open and accepting of sort of the range of sexuality that there is. So, I mean, I think it comes in sort of all of these different these forms. I wondered, Christina, within the classes that you teach when it comes to race and sexuality and so on, to what extent do you have religion coming into play in your conversations?
It comes into play in a lot of different ways, and I wanted to mention a couple of authors, but also a couple of really great video resources that are terrific for classroom use, but also just for any kind of educational setting, that give us ways to talk about these issues. One is called All God's Children, which is specifically about homophobia in the Black church, but just deals with these issues of sexuality and religion in some really interesting and complex ways, with a lot of very powerful testimonials, and also a film by Marlon Riggs called Black Is, Black Ain't, which is about the many, many, many different aspects of being African American, and has a segment on the role of religion, which in a really interesting way juxtaposes some really hateful and homophobic and intolerant comments from one particular minister, and also from popular culture, talking about what you were describing, religion, saying there's no place for homosexuality. And then this really powerful segment on this GLBT church, where it's, as one of your guests said, it's not only okay and tolerated, but it's actually essentially part of the church. So both of these videos are really powerful tools that I use in the classroom, but can be used in a lot of different settings.
Okay.
So both of those had to do with African American context, but a lot of the writers I teach are feminist writers, and they talk about the role of Catholicism and sexuality, which is really powerful as well, including Cherie Moraga and Carla Trujillo are a couple of ones I use.
Yeah. My screen here went black for a while, so I didn't realize we had so many people in the queue. So let's go to Davida in State College. Hi, Davida.
Hi. First I want to just say that I'm very glad that this conversation is taking place. I think it's very necessary within our local community and also our global community. The question that I have is that just within my own circles, within people that I've encountered and met for the first time and over the last couple of months, I've sensed a backlash or a closed-mindedness toward just even beginning to talk about the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender movement. And I was wondering if, and I've noticed this as a difference between, from my experience in the 90s. I was a graduate student in the 90s, between 94 and 97. And I'm wondering if that's something that that other people have had the experience of too. And the other thing I'm wondering is just, on a more positive note, I'm always curious, I'm always open and wondering about ways that I as an advocate can support gay, lesbian, and transgender and bisexual brothers and sisters.
Okay. Well, you raise a couple of different really interesting points and questions, and I wanted to throw it first to Christina and talk about, with the process, you mentioned the process of developing multicultural queer studies, that there was some resistance to it. But it sounds like obviously not enough to keep it from happening. So do you have a sense where you are? And obviously you're in a very different community and a very different place from where we are here in central Pennsylvania, but have you noticed that kind of a backlash?
The first thing I want to say about the concept of backlash is a backlash means that these efforts have made a difference. So as bad as backlash is, it's also a sign that our efforts are making a difference and that they're having an impact and that real change is happening, or people wouldn't be lashing back.
Well, it's just like the concept of same-sex marriage. People wouldn't have to be worried about it if it weren't a real possibility or a real thing. So yeah, absolutely.
So there's a way that I think it's important for us to keep that in mind and realize that there have been changes and progress. In our community, as in I think a lot of communities, there's a real mixture of things. On the one hand, we have this new minor. We have a student organization that used to be called GLBSA, that's now called QSU, so it was Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Student Association. Now it's Queer Student Union. We have a new cross-cultural queer film festival that now takes place every year on campus. There are all these really positive aspects. At the same time, there are still hate incidents that take place. There are many out faculty and students, but there are also many people who feel they cannot state publicly who they are. There have been tensions in the high schools in the community. I've heard of cases of students who were sent home for wearing what the administration thought were gender inappropriate clothing.
Gender inappropriate clothing?
I think one of these cases had to do with a teenage boy coming to school wearing what they considered to be female clothing. I think wearing a skirt or something like that, and being sent home as if he was, being dangerous to other students.
Right.
So, at the same time, you have really progressive things happening, and you have backlash happening. And
so it's a combination, and I suppose it in some sense it always is. I wanted to get to this question of advocacy, because that's something that I hadn't seen a whole lot of different places before I came to Penn State. This notion of the groups on campus, many of them have to do with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and allies. This concept of people who are not within the queer community in a way being advocates, and I wonder if either of you, Vivian or Susie, want to address some of the ways people can be supportive.
Sure, I'll jump in first. I'm actually one of the student leaders of one of the GLBT groups on campus, and so I can say that there's so many things that people can do to serve as allies on an individual level. Speak up when somebody says something derogatory about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people. If it's as simple as somebody saying, "God, that's so gay," in a derogatory way, say, "Why is that gay? Why do you say that?" I don't agree. You can join a student organization. There's an undergraduate organization called Allies that doesn't require you to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered. There are lots of events going on. There's the 1 in 10 Film Festival. There's the GLBT Coffee House. There's speakers constantly on campus addressing these issues to educate yourself and make you better able to educate others when the moments arise.
So basically, talk, listen, and get involved.
Definitely, yes.
are what we're talking about. There's a whole area that we have not addressed at all, and that has to do with racism in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer community. Take a breath. Now, here's my question. We've got several people on the line. We've got 7 minutes to go. I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to Mandy in Bellefonte for now, and hopefully we can also get to some of these other issues before the end of the hour, but we'll see what happens. So, hi, Mandy.
Hi. Hi, Susie. Hi, Vivian, Christina, everybody there.
Hi.
I actually just had a comment, and it doesn't have so much to do with race as it does with the homosexual marriages, same-sex marriages. I myself was married in September, and it was at the Unitarian Church, and there were about 170 people there, and it was just wonderful. Lots and lots of people have said, "Have you gone to New York yet?"
As if that's the only place you can do it, right?
Well, yeah, and actually, anyway.
That's a whole other thing, okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, but what we've talked about and we've decided is we don't care if it's called a marriage, and we don't care if there's a certificate that goes along with it. I mean, you can call it a domestic partnership, a civil union, whatever you want. It's the legal benefits and the legitimization, that the legitimacy that comes with that. I really appreciated that comment earlier.
Okay.
And, so anyway.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that insight. Let's go to Marcus in Mount Union. Hi, Marcus. Marcus, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
I just have a couple comments.
Okay.
To enlighten the young women, and I'm a Vietnam vet, so that's kind of telling my age. I'm in my 50s. We've had marriages back in my family back in the 50s between same-sex people.
In your family?
Yes, whether you believe it or not.
I believe you. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just surprised.
My comment is this. I had homosexuals in my unit when I was in Vietnam. One of the baddest soldiers I've ever had a pleasure of working with was a homosexual.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy humped a 50 caliber machine gun. And
does that mean he carried it? What is
carried it?
Okay.
That means he carried. Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I left myself open for that one. I'm a 50-year-old. Like I said, I'm a 50-some year-old black veteran, and there has always been homosexuals in the black community.
Of course, there have.
And
absolutely,
I feel bad for the young black lady that her church. I'm also a Baptist, and we've always had blacks. We've always had homosexuals in the Baptist church, and whether you know it or not, now that church that you went to and you felt, like you were out of place, you were right. You need to leave that church. Because in my church, we have homosexuals. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows that they're there. And still, the preacher, he preaches, the thing that, homosexuality is bad and stuff and whatnot. But in the congregation, with the preaching, especially in the Baptist church, You know, he's always right, no matter what what it is. He's always right in his mind.
Right.
In the congregation, within the congregation, you know, the people are accepted, and they always have been. My only thing that I have a problem with, and my reason for calling with this subject was, I just don't like the idea of associating homosexuality with racism.
Well, and that's a very
and I have a problem with that because, like I said, I come out of the 50s. I come out of the civil rights program, you know, out of the civil rights era and stuff and whatnot. And I really feel for homosexuality, for homosexuals and gays and lesbians and stuff and whatnot, because they are people. You know,
but you don't want it equated with this whole history of race.
Yeah, and the thing that we have got to learn as a people is that people are people no matter what they and who they are.
Marcus, I'm going to have to cut you off there, and I'm very sorry, but we have just about 3 minutes, and I have to apologize to the folks still on the line. We're not going to be able to get to your calls. We're at the point where we really need to wrap up, and we really didn't get a chance to talk about racism in the gay community, which is a shame. So I guess for you, Vivian and Susie, Vivian especially, it's your opportunity either to respond a little bit to what Marcus said or to talk a little bit about race in the gay community as a final thought so we can wrap up here.
I think I'll bring them together. One quick thing. I know you can never equate, I guess, racism or our experience throughout history with, I guess, the experience in the LGBTI community. But the thing is that we both have had very similar incidents. I know that racism has been, I guess, much more visible and whatnot, but homophobia has definitely been there. Gay people have been beaten just like black people have been beaten. It's just that it's been so much more closed, I think, and people haven't seen it as much. And I just think that it is still a civil rights issue when it boils down to it. When you have rights attached to something, particular marriage, then there's a problem. You know, everybody should have equal benefits, like health benefits and things and so on and so forth, whether you're married or whatnot. Unfortunately, it's attached to heterosexual marriage. But I would say linking racism with the gay community, it's still there. And basically we have a group called Undertones that kind of addresses that. Sorry.
That's okay. Susie, we don't have a whole lot of time. So.
Real quick, I think there's an incredible potential for strength and power and growth and movement if we build coalitions between all these different groups, LGBT, people of color, people of different religions. So I think that's really what we need to be striving towards and working for.
Okay. Christina?
Actually, I was going to end on that note as well, the power of coalition building, and I think the power of something like multicultural queer studies is that it tells us to look at all these things together in other many, many complex ways.
Right. I want to share with you something that I found on the web from a fellow who identifies as Arjun. We automatically equate being out and gay with being sensitive to certain issues. That's an unjustified assumption that we make as queers of color whenever we express surprise at racism coming from the gay community. In a subversive and twisted way, we become party to the racism because we infuse gayness/queerness with ideals for which there's no compelling and cohesive reason. That's unfortunately going to have to stand for our discussion of race in the gay community. That's it for this edition of Race Matters. I'd like to thank everyone who joined me, Vivian Smith, a graduate student in media studies at Penn State, Suzanne Aga, a graduate student in sociology, also at Penn State, and Christina Accomando, associate professor of English at Cal State University Humboldt and co-creator of the new interdisciplinary minor in multicultural queer studies. Thanks for being here, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back again April 13th. Until then, keep the conversation going. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Cindy Deutschman-Ruiz.
Race Matters is made possible by support from the Office of Educational Equity at Penn State University.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.